Thank you, Natalie, and it's a privilege to be in front of you this morning, this afternoon, as we hear a little bit of what God has done in a Christian school not too far from here, up in Toowoomba. So what I wanted to do today was just tell you about the journey, my journey. The school now, which was established in 1979, has 800 students, and it has a beautiful campus of about 45 acres. It now calls itself Toowoomba Christian College, a Christian school in the liberal arts tradition, which for our American visitors would not be strange language, but for people in Australia, it's unusual to have a school to call itself a school in the liberal arts tradition, let alone being a Christian school. So what I wanted to do today was to take you on a bit of a journey of what's happened for me with the journey to get to deciding to be a school in the Christian school in the liberal arts tradition. I was principal of that school for 30 years, from 1992 through to 2022. But I've had my own influences prior to making the decision. So I was educated in a boys' state high school in Sydney. Straight after school, I went to a Bible college for a year. I then studied and got a degree in applied science. I ended up teaching in a Sydney school called Toowoomba College, which is a GPS all-boys school, over 100 years old. Took a year off from that. I went to the Philippines, did some mission work. I came back to Newington for a year, and then I went on to the North Shore of Sydney to be in a fledgling Christian school called Toowoomba Christian Academy. 1987, I was appointed principal, and they closed the school at the end of that year. Great experience. Not really. Toowoomba Christian College, I moved there in 1988, and that's another story. So what's influenced me as I've been preparing this presentation was to think of those various places that I stopped off along the way. North Sydney Boys, I studied maths and I studied Latin for 6 years in the high school. Great school, but I don't think I got out of it what I should have got out of it, as I've reflected. You know the one area that I felt I missed out on? I had no one come up to me and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Brown, I think you can do better." I was captain of the first 11. Australians would know what that means. But no one really said, "You've got talent, let's do something with it," or was that tutor, that mentor, that guide that came alongside. So I missed out on that, charted my own course. Went to Bible college, what would I end up believing? Went to the University of Technology in Sydney, as it's now called. In the early days of computing, I was quite taken with computers. One of my lecturers was working at Woomera in the missile area, and that just fascinated me. What could I do with that, this new world of computing? And I ended up going to teach in a school at Toowoomba College, which was an elite school, still is an elite school. It's going through some interesting dramas at the moment with the decision to go co-ed. But gave me an opportunity to see what a school could actually look like 100 years on. Started off as a 17-student theological college and ended up being one of the elite schools of Australia. That was helpful for me to see what education could become as I went on my journey. For the Philippines, would I go mission work? Would I go back to Australia and do some back into teaching? That was something that was influential for me. What's a calling in life? Then Toowoomba Christian Academy, having these young students that parents had decided to put in the care of Toowoomba Christian Academy, a new experience in education, really an experiment in education rather than an experience. These young people, 20, I can almost read the roll now of my first class there in 1982. They were precious young people, followed some of their journeys, and that just raised more questions for me. How effective is a Christian education? And then went to Toowoomba Christian College and was given the opportunity in this state to chart almost a different course in the way that the school went. outside of the box. What could you do if you didn't follow the system per se? So they were the things that have been my journey. So in 1992, when I was asked to be the principal of TCC, I was on staff. Toowoomba, as you might know, is quite a hub for the Darling Downs area for education. When I started as principal in 1992, there was 13 private schools, of which 7 were boarding. There were only 3 state high schools, very dominated by independent learning, that whole area. The school that I was in was viewed locally as this as being polite, new and different, very strange, not engaged, small and church affiliated. I was appointed to be the principal in April 1992, and there was only 134 students. So the questions that were raised in my thinking at the time is, would anybody want to enrol their children in TCC? Would our current community back the 4th principal in 5 years? What we'll be offering as a school? What would we become? A school like the others in Toowoomba that were offering a standard Year 12 graduation? How could you fund an enterprise when you're not relying on federal funding? And what would my own personal future be with a family of 4 kids? My decisions in 1992 was I'd stick it out. We would approach our local university, the University of Southern Queensland as it was at the time, about accepting our students straight out of school rather than going through the TE process as it was at the time. We would ditch ACE, for those who know what that is, Accelerated Christian Education, and develop our own curriculum. We would start to build the infrastructure to make us more like a school. Our staff would need to be willing to sacrifice and help rebuild, and the church would need to financially undergird us. Not easiest path to tread. So, I've been asked today to share my reflections on the last 30 years where we've ended up being a school, as you read, in the liberal arts tradition. But what I wanted to do was actually pause for a moment, because there's so many things I could talk about, and find out where you're itching so I can scratch there. So you've heard me give a bit of an overview of TCC, gone from 100 students up to 800. We've been a liberal arts school. I'm happy to talk about how we got to that point, which happened in 2017, as I call it, when we crossed the Rubicon, when we decided to burn the bridge, to burn the boats. We weren't going back. We were going on a new course. How I got to that point, how the staff got there. I could talk about what's happened since 2017, about the changes that have taken place as we've tried to implement liberal arts within a standard school here in Australia. What was that like? What are some of the resources, Richard, that you found that have helped you? So you can go to resources. You could talk about funding. You could talk about taking staff on a journey. So if you're brave enough to give me a lead of what you'd like to know, then I'll take it that way, or you'll just have to sit here and follow my story as the way I want to tell it. But questions? Sister.
Well, our school would like to know what we understand why you would go liberal arts after being part of this wonderful conference. But what were your steps? What did you start with?
Yep.
How did you integrate it? How did you integrate it into the Australian curriculum?
Yeah, Australian curriculum, yeah.
How do you bring the staff?
Yes.
With progressive educational model.
How to take the staff on the journey? How to get the parents on board? Great questions. Money. How do you get the money? Yeah.
You said you developed your own curriculum
Yep.
and you wrote back. What did that actually look like again? And that would then tie into the staff, because is that requiring the staff to write that curriculum, which is also active on board with
Yeah.
this, but then you write your own curriculum is a significant undertaking.
All right.
What mistakes, if any,
Yeah. How long have you got? What mistakes, what have we learnt along the way? Anthony?
What support do you currently have in the Australian climate to help you?
Yeah, great question. How can we find people that think like we do and will be willing to support us? Yeah, good question. Would we do things differently now? My PowerPoint actually has 62 slides in it. And what we could do is disseminate that through the system, because I think I'd be able to answer some of the questions. But I just wanted to get not just the spread of them, but I wanted to know just where you were, because otherwise I'll just sort of half entertain you for the next 30 minutes and you say, that was a nice story, but you haven't taken anything away. So how do I help you take away some things? So anybody else wanted to give me their thoughts or vote on which one they want to hear? Or you're all good? Happy for me to choose one? So let me talk about what we've done with curriculum, because I think that's a really interesting one. Back in the 1990s in Australia, or first of all for our American guests, it'd be nice for them to know that Australia has the 6 states and some territories, and every state's got the right to choose their own curriculum. That's historically the way it's been. And if you transferred from one state to another state, you'd have to go through a whole different process of graduating at the end of high school. That's still the way that it is here in Australia, but the Australian government in about 2011, 2013, or back to 2008, but brought it more in legislation in 2013 with the Education Act. So we've got this federal government that is also in charge of education. So it's a sort of a dual system. The best benefactor of schools in terms of funding is the federal government. So you've got to make sure you listen to the federal government, because they would give a large amount of your operating costs, recurrent costs as they call it, recurrent grants. And they give it on a spread of the poorer schools need more money, the rich schools need less money. So it's very much on an assessment of where you are. With the curriculum, starting in the 1992, we were outside of the TE system, the ATAR system, but we still had students graduating at year 12. Being somewhat, this is going to be recorded, being somewhat subversive in attitude, or wanting to find ways outside of the box, that's a nicer way of putting it. Wanting to find, look, you tell me to do this, but can I do that? Is most probably the response you'll get from me if you ask me, can you do something? I will try and find a way that will satisfy the requirements of government, but I won't ask for their approval. Interesting, isn't it? You can satisfy requirements, but I'm not going to ask them, would they please approve what I'm doing? If I fit within the requirements, then they'll come looking for me if they want to find me. But they don't really want to come and find, they just want you to not stick your head out and ask them questions. We went and saw a person from the government when we were really weighing up, should we get on board with the Australian curriculum in toto? And they said, I'm here from the government, how can I help you? Heard that line? And he was basically saying, don't ask me a question that you don't want the answer to. I'm here from the government, I'm here to help you. Don't ask me to approve your program. Tell me that you are fitting within the requirements that I'm putting upon you. And there's a big difference between those two. So we took that model and said, right, we're not going to ask you, we're not going to explain to you how we're doing it. We are just going to satisfy. So when you go to the Australian Education Act, it asks you to implement the Australian curriculum. It doesn't give you the adverb with which you are supposed to implement. And I was happy to acknowledge that at times I might be implementing the Australian curriculum poorly. Incompletely. I was happy to go down that way. So when they said there was things that needed to be done, I felt I was meeting the requirements I was implementing the Australian curriculum. It would be my guide, it would be the framework, but I wasn't going to say to them, tell me how many hours am I supposed to be doing this? Because in the legislation, it didn't tell you how many hours you're supposed to do. They were regulations that were going to come, they weren't in the legislation. So the basic approach that I took was we were a successful school, we'd been graduating students. Isn't that what school's about? So if you want to question whether our students are going forward, I'll tell you the results of our students from year 12. I won't tell you how we got them into university. I won't tell you how many doctors we've developed, even though there's been doctors and lawyers and all those things. But the faith and the commitment of the parents has been such that they entrusted their children to the school, and we worked hard to get them on the pathway that they needed to be on. So in answer to the question of how to do it, I think you just got to be, as someone we greatly love, wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Find a way. There is a way. Now, you've got to be comfortable with the course that you choose. Because at the end of the day, if you are the principal, you've got to be responsible for the decisions you make. So that was the answer to the Australian curriculum. Now, when it comes to, in this state, the formation of the Non-State School Accreditation Board in 2001, it is the group that gives you the registration to be a school that the government will fund. New South Wales, it's a different system, and the other states have their own system. I had to learn how to play the game in the Queensland system. So I'm not an expert in New South Wales of how it's done. But I know what I try and do, I try and find a way. I would not be asking them to approve my program unless I really have to get them to do it. And I try to do it as in minimalist way as possible, so I'm not overcommitting myself, is the advice I'd give. In this state, a little bit different to New South Wales and Victoria, there are a lot of alternate schools in Queensland. When I say alternate, I'm not talking about whether they're Montessori schools or they're following a different system, Seventh-day Adventist or something else like that. I'm talking about schools that are there trying to help young people, special assistance schools they're called. And they only have 20 or 30, maybe up to 50 kids in them, and they are trying to look after kids that the system won't look after. And they get registration. And I know they can't fully satisfy all the requirements that there are for registration, but they get there. Because the government, in that sense, I'm here from the government, how do I support? Just tell me you're doing the regulations. I haven't got a checklist. Now that might change, but I think that was the environment that we've got in this state that wants to see students succeed, that wants to see government not too intrusive, and if you're satisfying that you are getting students through, then it's possible. So I'm happy to enlarge on that, Sister, for you, but I think that would be something to consider, finding the way to frame it. I'm not sure whether that answers your question of the teachers. So the teachers, let me take you through to some slides here. So I'll just duck out of that. Teachers are wonderful people. Schools need them, but they are somewhat intransigent. They don't like change. So taking them on that particular journey, we found, looking at the abolition of man, that told the vision over the man without chests and the idea of doing something, of bringing them formationally, was really helpful to say there's a goal. But this particular challenge that he opens up with in the first part of the book, where he talks about the experience of being at the waterfall. And he overheard, and there's this green book that he's talking about, and he talks about the experience of two people commenting on the waterfall. Is it sublime or is it pretty? And I use this as an example with the staff when they were sitting in some presentations that we were doing. And when I talked about that, you know what the response was? Was what is in our culture? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's the common language. But that statement only came in the 1860s or something else like that. It's not the way traditionally beauty has been beheld. So when you start challenging staff over things like this, how are you going to work out whether a waterfall is sublime or whether it is pretty? Is that an assessment you're making, or is there a standard out there? And I think staff can go on that sort of journey. So that was one of those, is beauty in the eye of the beholder. And then the whole understanding more of truth as what are you seeking and what are you heading towards, rather than where have you arrived. And as I said, maths was my background, but there's a lot of maths I don't know. But there's maths that I do know. So if you said, Richard, do you love maths? Yes. Do you know all maths? No. So there's an opportunity to take staff on a journey to say, you know this, but what else do you need to know? And then that's a journey towards truth. And then I think you help staff see, well, not only is it just a matter of, I want to be a better teacher, there's things that I don't fully know yet. There's things that I want to grow in. And that was helpful to do that. And then thinking about the history of education. But really what talked about the origins of education coming from the two Latin verbs, the educare and educare, one to train and one to lead out. Started this question, what are we in education for? Where are we leading young people? If you're leading them out through the door, what are they supposed to do when they get out? What sort of young person are we developing? And I shared with them my own struggles as being a principal of a Christian school who had spent many hours in thought and prayer and support for these young people. And then when they've left school, it's almost like they've left their Christianity behind. I taught them to conform. I hadn't taught them how to be transformed. So it was important that we had behaviour. People would behave right, but not necessarily being transformed in the heart. So as I started to share, I think this is coming back to how to take the staff on your journey, is to talk about the disappointments without naming people, the disappointments you've had of all the time and energy and the vision that you had. You thought you gave it to young people, they walked out the door, and somehow it hadn't entered them to the degree that you'd wish that it had. So sharing those personal experiences was important. And then this whole thought of leading them to what? The emphasis in Australia of jobs, jobs, jobs. Scott Morrison, you might remember him saying that. Well, that's the brainwashing staff have got, that it's only here about getting them out the door with the piece of paper rather than what they become. And then this thought that I've used, and I think it's a great one, we want not just a good doctor to go to, we want a good doctor. You don't want someone who's just a good builder to build your house. You want a good builder. Someone who's not going to rip you off when they're building you your nice house. So this idea that it's not just about the skill, it's about who the person is, trying to help staff bring those two things together was really important. So when you see little Johnny sitting down there in front of you and he's being compliant and everything else like that, you should say, wait a minute, I'm just looking at the outside here, I'm not seeing the full student. And that full student has got some challenges that somehow as an educator I've got to lead them out from the darkness that's in their hearts, along with their parents, along with the church. And I'm not saying that we are the saviours in that sense, but wanting to take people on a journey. The next one that was really a challenge was this. A gentleman called James Greenway wrote a book in 2020, Human Dignity, Education and Political Society. The quote's there, you can read it later. Here's the challenge. Your next teaching job's in a prison. want you to go to the prison and I want you to teach them, those that are in there for 10 or 15 years, maybe even for life. And I thought, I'm so orientated to say, look, I want to teach you how to live out there rather than finding answers for where you are now. And this guy here got involved in the project of going to the prison to teach people. And what would you be teaching them? Well, of course, if they can't read, you want to help them to read, and if they need some maths help, you wouldn't mind doing that. But isn't there a bigger story that they need to find contentment and fulfillment in? And so you'll read this story through of how they went and started to paint a picture for these young people who found themselves in prison, made some wrong choices, but actually started to now realise what life was all about. So it helped me and helped in the way that I spoke to the staff about what would you do if you're going to be teaching in a prison? And then there's a story in one of the books I got here of the same sort of exercise happening out of Calvin College in the States, of some of their faculty going down to the prison to teach. What a challenge to take some young person who's so disengaged with life, they've done what they've done, and not just tell them about the love of Christ, but give them a framework for how they can view life even if they never get out. And that's the hope that I think comes out of true education. All right. So here was the questions I had. What would be my goal if I was teaching in a prison? What would I be preparing my class for? What would be my content? And how would I know that I've done a great job? So I'm answering the question here of trying to help you see the things that you could be saying to your staff that challenges them, their view of education, their understanding of what its purpose is, and then putting them in a situation where they'd feel really uncomfortable, not just because they're in a prison, but now I've got a class that I don't know how to teach because my content, my experience isn't connecting well with what they've got. But there is a story that they need to hear, and how do I then frame that? And I think the liberal arts is the best framework to help them see what is a good life and where they're up to. All right. Here's the challenges that I know those of you in the room who are thinking of starting or involved in starting a new school. The finance, the facilities, the staff, meeting external requirements, articulating the vision, but meeting the here and now. Resources, being connected wider than you are, finding the right leader for now and the leader to follow. Governance. Huge list. Each one of them has got its own big challenges. But I'd be happy to talk to some people about how we manage some of those things. But as I've reflected on the journey of TCC, these three words just keep coming back to me. So wherever you are and whatever you're planning to do, you've got to have these three things well embedded in your approach. What's the vision? Can you articulate it? Can you do it in that elevator lift, 30-second grab? What is it that you're really passionate about that you can communicate in the really short period of time? What's your vision? Secondly, you're going to have to build on sacrifice. Someone's going to have to sacrifice. The parents who are going to bring their children to your school are sacrificing what? Another education on the hope that you will deliver the vision that you are talking about. And I'm so grateful for the parents when I started in 1992 as principal who were willing to leave their kids in the school, hoping that the new guy might stick around for a while and it might grow. But look at the opposition that was in town. 13 other choices for you if you wanted to go to an independent school in Toowoomba. And why put up with something that is struggling, half failing, got poor reputation? The reason why parents stuck it out, I think, is because someone was able to articulate a vision to stay. And it wasn't just that we needed you. The vision was, we see something. We want to take you there. We're not sure how to do it, but it's going to require ongoing sacrifice. Because we're talking at a time here in 1992 when we were receiving no government funding. The government funding of this current TCC budget would be at least 50%. Imagine taking out 50% of your income and then saying, would you still come and work for me, but I'm not sure how I'm going to pay you. The church undergirding, staff taking less than they could have elsewhere because they bought into a vision. And then the commitment. And I'm so grateful for the people that were willing to work with me, with all my foibles and issues. They were willing to be committed as a team. And that was the foundation that took us from 1992 through to 2017, that long period of time where some of those staff were still the ones that were back there, to become a Christian school in the liberal arts tradition. So it just doesn't happen overnight. The vision grows, your team comes and goes, but some will stick it out. And commitment to the vision was really important. I've got about 5 minutes to go, then we will wrap it up. So some thoughts I wanted to throw out to you today to think about in terms of how to go forward with your vision are these points. I'm a strong believer in playing to people's strengths, but still remain as a team. So here's the question: who in your team is best able to? Now, does this fit into their job description or not? That's not really the question. The question is you need to find the right person to do the right task. And if they're committed, they'll be willing to say, this one's better than me at this. Choose them. A deputy who's willing to step aside to let someone else do it. A principal who's willing to let someone else do something. All those things become really key when you realise it's the team that needs to get the job done. Yes, you're the principal, yes, you're coordinating, but you're not doing everything. So understand the requirements to satisfy the educational authorities. That's really important because they're the people that can pull the pin. But play a smart game. Continue to motivate your team and coordinate your team. I think this is really important. This is why you're here at this conference, is to develop links and partnerships. I know what it's like to stand alone in a crowd of educators because they didn't know what to do with me and I didn't know what to do with them because the school I'd been in had isolated itself from others. And I was so grateful to be welcomed into the community and then to play an ongoing part within the educational community in my town. But it takes that first step to develop links and partnerships. Articulate the vision. When you're cut, what do you bleed? What are you passionate about? What's that first response when someone says, what do you do? Why do you do it? What's Christian education anyway? Where do you go? What do you say? It was important for us to make sure that the inner workings of a school were reviewed and improved. You know, when you're in isolation, you think you're pretty good because you've got nothing to compare yourself with. But once you start getting out and about, you realise that there's lots of things to improve, and you set up the better inner workings of a school. I find financial supporters, deal with the council and builders, and put together a business model were some thoughts that I had. So I just wanted to quickly show you some of the readings that I've done, most of this in retirement. So I finished up in 2022, and people say, Richard, what have you been doing the last 3 years? Well, I've taken the opportunity to get involved in looking at some things. But in terms of education, Cyropedia, The Education of Cyrus, is a great book. So is De Officiis by Cicero. Laws, so you can read the list. I've got them down the front here if you want to have a quick look. This is the book that summarised the conference in 2017 when we were in Hobart, went down to the Christopher Dawson Centre for Cultural Studies. Thank you, Catholic Cultural Studies. And 4 of us were in the room. And it was that moment when we decided that the Rubicon was there for us to cross it. That's the summary of it. And those down the front can actually read the title of it, Creative Subversion. The liberal arts and the human educational fulfilment. Great summary of the things that we heard inspired us to continue the journey. When we went back to Toowoomba, did the school change overnight? No. But we knew the direction we were going to go in. And in 2019, our federal government, I think it was federal, state government, one of the governments gave independent schools some money to develop their teachers. And as a result of that, we sent some staff over in 2019 at the government's expense, $20,000, I think it was, to send 8 staff over to a conference in Dallas, which took them on the journey. And some of them are sitting right here. And I'm so excited for what that gift of the government was at the time when we needed it. So the Lord provides. If He'd given us the money a couple of years before, I'm not sure what we would have done with it. But we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to invest in staff. We wanted to grow the staff. And the Lord made that possible. Anyway, I've wandered around a whole range of things. I'm not sure whose question I actually answered. I'm hoping that as you look at, if you want to come look at the books, please do. If you've got some questions. I want to finish with this. In Exodus 18:21, Exodus, the time of the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. They don't get there by the end, but some significant things happen along the way. And one of those significance is Exodus 18:21, when Jethro turns up. Jethro turns up and he's the father-in-law of Moses, and he's watching Moses doing. You know how hard Moses was working? From morning to night, he was there solving all the problems of the people as best he could. Father-in-law comes into the tent. Moses, what you doing is not good. You're going to wear yourself out, you're going to wear the people out. So my encouragement to you is to find a Jethro. Find someone who won't just pat you on the back and say, Richard, you're doing a really good job, just carry on. But they're going to say to you, what you're doing is not good, and you're not going to do a bobcatter. You were going to say, thank you, because you have actually given me some good advice. So receiving advice from outside is really helpful. So if you haven't got a Jethro, if you haven't got someone who's walking alongside of you and who's giving you a good, effective counsel and advice, find them. I think the Lord's got them around. Just got to find your Jethro. Thank you for listening.